Welcome to History Twists, the podcast in which we imagine a change in some events and follow how it might have changed things all the way to today. Picture the War of 1812 ending the way it basically did. No clear winner, a tired Britain, an exhausted United States, but then one decision changes everything. Britain does not abandon its native allies. Tecumseh does not die, and a united native nation emerges in the heart of North America, what we are going to call A.N.A.
And not as a symbolic nation, a recognized nation with borders, diplomacy, and leverage.
Then here's the twist. The U.S. doesn't destroy it. The U.S. eventually joins with it on equal terms.
So let's start today, the aftermath of the War of 1812, in a world where the alliance of Native America, or as we say, A.N.A., forces a new American future.
And today we're doing an alternate aftermath of the War of 1812. Specifically, what happens if Britain keeps backing native nations, Tecumseh survives, and Native Americans don't lose their land.
We're calling the new native state, as I've said, the Alliance of Native America, or A.N.A. And we're going to do this in several different moves. One, what changes right after the war? Two, how the A.N.A. becomes a durable nation, how the U.S. and A.N.A. end up joining together without conquest, without removal, and on equal footing. And four, impact on slavery. Yes, because it would have. And five, impact on the environment. And yes, it would have.
Alternate history works best, ladies and gentlemen, when the pieces still behave like real political actors: money, security, trade, public opinion, and geography.
Also, we're not doing a perfect world fantasy here. There are conflicts in this timeline, but the difference is the native side has real power to shape the outcomes. First, let's review what happens in our real timeline. How about it?
In the real timeline, a major native coalition forms around Tecumseh's leadership. The goal is to stop U.S. expansion into the old Northwest Territory, what will become Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, and beyond. Britain cooperates with Native allies during the war because it benefits them militarily.
Then the war ends. Britain negotiates peace primarily for British interests. Native protection, it gets left behind. Tecumseh dies in 1813 at the Battle of the Thames, and the coalition loses its central strategist and unifier.
And without that backing and leadership, the U.S. pushes west hard. Treaties, pressure, forced relocation, violence, and eventually formal policies like the removal of Native Americans from their land. Now, let's move into our divergence.
Here's our divergence. Britain decides something different after the war, not out of kindness, out of strategy.
Britain looks at North America and decides the United States is going to be a long-term competitor. Britain wants a buffer, a stable native ally zone between the U.S. and British Canada.
So basically, Britain treats native allies the way empires treat valuable partners: arms, advisors, trade access, diplomatic recognition, and now this is key here, folks: commitment after the shooting stops.
The second divergence, Tecumseh survives. That could have happened in a variety of ways, but two of the most prominent is either the Thames battle goes quite differently, or he's wounded and evacuated, or the engagement just doesn't happen in the same way and on the same terms.
If Tecumseh lives, the coalition keeps its unifying voice, but also its political center of gravity. Tecumseh wasn't just a war leader, he was a coalition builder.
And with Britain staying involved, the A.N.A. or the A.N.A. becomes more than resistance. It becomes governments. So the A.N.A. isn't a British colony. It is a British-backed sovereign partner. The British are in essence saying, we want you strong because it makes our rival weaker.
The A.N.A. can't just declare itself and survive. It needs legitimacy, especially in a world dominated by states.
So Britain gives it legitimacy, not necessarily with a single grand treaty at first, but with action. British diplomatic channels treat A.N.A. leaders like state counterparts. British forts and supply lines support A.N.A. security. British merchants trade under protections, and British Canada coordinates border enforcement.
In other words, Britain behaves as if the A.N.A. is sovereign. So other powers start behaving that way also.
Then the A.N.A. sends delegations to Canada, to Washington, and quietly to France and Spain, not begging, signaling we exist, we are organized, and we will not be erased.
This is where realism matters. Borders in North America weren't just lines on a map, they were settlement pressure. To hold their land, the A.N.A. must stop illegal settlement and prevent the constant facts on the ground that force surrender.
When you say facts on the ground, what do we mean there, Dr. Deneen? We mean settlers that just come in, they sit there, and when they're there, then they become, oh, a political force.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Weaver.
Absolutely. And so the A.N.A. forms something like a coalition defense system, not a single army, but coordinated militias under shared command rules, because that matches how different nations could cooperate while at the same time keeping autonomy.
And Britain supports with training, weapons, and logistics, but doesn't run it. The A.N.A. must look independent or it becomes a British puppet and loses legitimacy.
At the same time, the A.N.A. creates border courts, the practical system. If settlers cross, they're detained, fined, and escorted back. Repeat offenders lose their goods, and armed raiders are treated as simple criminals.
And folks, that alone changes everything. In the real world, unchecked settlement was the engine of removal. Here, it's slowed.
Now, let's talk about Tecumseh. His big challenge was always unity. Different nations, different interests.
So the A.N.A. becomes a federation, not one monolithic nation that erases identities, but a shared alliance similar to NATO with a council structure.
Let's call it the Great Council of the Alliance. Each member nation keeps internal authority, but foreign policy, defense coordination, and trade rules become alliance level powers.
Tecumseh acts as the coalition's chief diplomat and strategist. You might think of him as a first speaker rather than a king. It's politically smarter.
And to keep its cohesion, the A.N.A. does two very modern things very early. One, it has a standardized treaty process internally so one nation cannot be bought or tricked into ceding alliance land alone. Second, it has a shared integrity land rule. Land cannot be sold outside the alliance without the council's approval.
Now that is huge. That blocks the classic playbook of divide and acquire.
Yeah. So, what does the U.S. do when expansion runs into an organized, armed, internationally connected native federation?
It splits into factions always. One faction wants war, another wants treaties, a third wants commerce, And another group wants to focus elsewhere, like either in the South or on internal development.
And the United States also has a credibility problem here. If it invades the A.N.A., Britain might not declare war immediately, but Britain can definitely fund a sustained resistance and make the frontier ungovernable.
So the U.S. tries pressure first, backing settlers, private militias, economic coercion, propaganda framing the A.N.A. as a British proxy.
And the ANTA counters it by acting more like a state. Formal diplomacy, open trade, clear law enforcement structures, and a consistent border policy. Diplomatic engagement with Europe, France, Spain, and Great Britain in particular, and North America gives the new nation greater political legitimacy.
Now, here's something that people tend to underestimate: the geography. The Great Lakes region is a trade powerhouse. Rivers, portage routes, timber, and later minerals. This area matters.
So A.N.A. leverages tariffs and access. American merchants want passage. The A.N.A. can charge fees, regulate ports, and importantly, offer favorable terms to states that respect A.N.A. borders.
This introduces a new American debate. Do we destroy the ANTA or do we make money with them?
And once money's involved, that's when the politics change.
Yeah, the A.N.A. has to do something that's hard even for modern coalitions, and that is to keep member nations unified without erasing them.
So it adopts, as we said, a federation model, a great council for defense, diplomacy, trade corridors, and land integrity. Internal governance remains local to each member nation.
And the key rule is that land cannot be ceded out from under the alliance, one small treaty at a time.
Right, that's vital, an integrity clause. In the real world, as we said, the U.S. benefited from fragmented negotiations. Here, fragmentation is both legally and politically harder.
Yes, I want to emphasize what you just said there, Dr. Deneen. The U.S. benefited from fragmented negotiations. In other words, they divided the Native Americans into small pieces and dealt with each of them that way. And they had to deal from a position of weakness, not power. So this comes to the non glamorous part, the enforcement. A.N.A. sets up patrol systems and border courts. Trespass becomes a predictable outcome: return, fines, confiscation for repeat offenses, criminal prosecution for violence.
And that's what stops the settle first, legalize later.
It's also very important that Britain's involvement stays in the background, as we've said. Supply chains, training, and most important, diplomatic signaling that an attack on the ANA could become very costly.
The U.S. is forced into a new calculation. Expansion isn't just moving people, it risks a long frontier conflict with external support.
Both the US and A.N.A. feel the need to be connected from sea to shining sea. Now, we need to clarify what from sea to sea means. That doesn't mean two clean old rectangles. It means that each federation has uninterrupted sovereign access to both oceans through corridors and connected territories.
Yeah, Anna's sea to sea logic becomes in the east, of course, the Chesapeake outlet through what is now Chesapeake, Virginia. In the west, Pacific Northwest, and outlet alliances with what is now, like Washington State, and with Western nations. And in the interior, the Great Lakes and river routes anchored by A.N.A. governance. Sea to sea access for both the US and A.N.A. would be critical for trade and diplomatic relations.
Meanwhile, the U.S. becomes sea to sea via a southern central arc, the Atlantic outside the Anna Chesapeake zone through the southeast Gulf across the southwest to California.
This land in Chesapeake, Virginia, and in that area is a very huge divergence. So, how could that happen? Well, it's an outcome of leverage, not a magical consent vote.
Here's the mechanism. Britain and Anna jointly pressure the Atlantic trade environment, a naval presence, customs complications, and border costs. The U.S. faces repeated frontier flare ups and severe economic pain. To stabilize commerce and avoid a renewed war spiral, Washington reluctantly accepts a hard bargain, an Anna controlled Chesapeake zone.
So the A.N.A. gets an eastern anchor that makes it uncontainable, because now it's not just inland resistance, it is a coastal state.
And that shifts everything: diplomacy, trade, migration, and sanctuary for people escaping systems the U.S. is trying to enforce.
Yes, folks, we're talking about slavery. Chattel slavery depends on permanence. People simply cannot leave. When a sovereign neighbor refuses to return escapees, slavery becomes harder to enforce, especially near borders and transit routes.
And the A.N.A. isn't just refusing quietly, it's building legal doctrine. No human being is property inside A.N.A. jurisdiction. That is a state policy.
Plus, Anna's coastal outlet and inland routes create practical escape networks, not romanticized, dangerous, contested, and violent at times, but feasible enough to matter.
The U.S. tries recapture pressure, but every attempt risks border incidents with the Anna, and Britain's shadow deterrence still matters.
So the U.S. starts losing labor in a way that it can't fully stop without a larger war that it can't justify or afford.
The US doesn't suddenly become enlightened, it adapts. It shifts towards a term labor system like indentured servitude, debt labor, contract servitude, because it is easier to defend legally and more resilient against sanctuary borders.
The permanent inherited property framework weakens. Children are harder to classify as property for life under a system constantly bleeding across borders.
So exploitation continues, but the institution doesn't calcify the same way. That changes everything downstream. The politics of sectional power, the legal architecture of caste, and the intensity and timing of national rupture.
You still get moral conflict, you still get violence, but the continent's biggest neighbor is actively undermining slavery's enforceability. By mid century, railroads and industrial growth make the frontier less romantic and more logistical. You need stable corridors, standardized rules, and long term investment confidence.
And you can't build a continental economy with a perpetual border war. So both the US and ANA expand compacts, transit rights, customs standards, and cross border crime protocols.
Now, this is where the latter 1890 union becomes plausible. Institutions start decades before the Constitution level merger.
The ANA doesn't conquer westward, it federates. Western nations and what is Canada in our world see the writing on the wall. Settler colonial expansion is coming, and aligning with a sovereign native federation offers both a defensive umbrella and trade leverage.
And importantly, it offers diplomacy. Western nations don't have to negotiate alone with empires. They negotiate as part of a bloc. So let's take a look at industrialization, environment, and why the A.N.A matters now. The A.N.A's environmental posture is not a modern slogan. It's governance logic. Land is identity, food security, and political survival.
So resource extraction is regulated much earlier. There's not zero extraction, there's regulated extraction. Watersheds, forests, and hunting grounds are treated as strategic national assets, not disposable commodities.
And because rivers and air cross borders, the U.S. can't ignore it. Pollute upstream, and you're in conflict with a sovereign partner.
This timeline invents interfederation environmental standards earlier. What do I mean? Like river protections, forest management rules, restrictions on industrial dumping near shared waters, early protected land designations that look like kind of proto national parks.
And there's also political consequences. The U.S. gets used to negotiating constraints rather than assuming it can do everything and anything everywhere.
Indigenous nations in Western Canada aligned with the A.N.A. Now, what does that actually mean for us in geopolitical terms?
It means that A.N.A becomes a trans-border federation that doesn't accept the colonial border as destiny. Western indigenous nations, plains, plateaus, subarctic, and coastal networks see the A.N.A as the best available shield against being picked apart one by one.
And Britain's calculus shifts again. Britain wants stability and trade, and it recognizes that forcing settler expansion into the West triggers expensive conflict. So Britain tolerates, then gradually formalizes A.N.A aligned sovereignty across large stretches of the Western interior.
So, Canada as we know it doesn't simply roll west without resistance. Confederation, settlement policies, rail plans, everything hits a sovereign wall.
Exactly. In the real timeline, Western expansion becomes a state project. Here, it becomes a negotiation with a sovereign indigenous federation that has international recognition and functioning institutions.
Because now the A.N.A isn't just a neighbor, it's a continental network that touches both coasts and influences the interior north and west. The U.S. cannot treat it as temporary.
And the U.S. also can't build a smooth coast to coast economic system without stable, shared rules, rail, tariffs, currency stability, dispute courts, and migration standards.
So the pressure builds for two possible outcomes, either constant friction or a formal higher level compact.
Sometime around, say, maybe 1890 or so, the US and A.N.A take the final step. They join, not by absorbing the A.N.A, but by forming a constitutional level continental compact.
Think of it as a dual federal union. Enumerated shared powers include mutual defense, a shared currency, standardized finance rules, interfederation commerce and transit, a joint high court for disputes between A.N.A citizens and U.S. citizens, and continental scale environmental standards for shared waters and forests.
And the A.N.A. keeps what matters: land law, internal governments, citizenship rules, cultural protections, local courts, and policing.
Equal basis has to be real. So the compact creates a shared governing body where the A.N.A cannot be outvoted into irrelevance. It might be something like this: one chamber by population, one chamber by federated equality, like A.N.A member nations and US states or regions with protected parity, plus explicit veto protections on treaties or land issues involving territory.
That solves the core instability, border violence, trade friction, rail corridor disputes, and international meddling. It turns a permanent standoff into a permanent framework.
Now let's take a look at how all of these events could affect present day. So, what does 2026's life look like in this world, Dr. Weaver?
Well, first, identity and governance. The A.N.A is not a footnote, it's a pillar of continental sovereignty. Maps, schools, and law recognize multiple founding polities.
Second, labor and civil rights. Chattel slavery, as we said, never hardens the same way because sanctuary sovereignty makes it unstable. Sadly, exploitation doesn't vanish, it shifts into term labor, debt systems, and industrial coercion, meaning the major social battles of our time still exist, but the legal architecture and timeline differ.
And third, the environment. You have early watershed protections and forest management produce a continent with stronger conservation norms, more intact ecosystems, and earlier shared standards. Politics, especially around rivers and extractive zones.
Yeah, those earlier shared standards of politics were very important. And fourth, geopolitics. A continent built on negotiated dual sovereignty is harder for outside empires to manipulate. The US becomes powerful, but not through total absorption, through partnership and constant negotiation is the new route. The new joint nation actually becomes more powerful internationally more quickly and moves more towards being a democracy than strictly a republic.
Listen, thank you for listening to this episode of History Twists, and we hope that you have enjoyed our divergence of the War of 1812. And please come back next time. Bye bye.
We have a lot more interesting things to show you. Please give comments and likes. Goodbye for now.
Well, bye, and y'all have a good one.